And
All right,
we are
I'm recording.
Yep. Great. Okay, so I just want to kind of open up with some announcements. And so I just want to talk about kind of the schedule for the rest of the course. So you all have basically kind of gone through what I consider the beginning part of the course. And I will say depending on your midterm and what you did with it, I will basically bestow upon you the moniker of data ninja. So you all know many of the important skills with basically loading and importing data. Of course, we didn't talk about everything in the tidyverse, but I feel like we've given you kind of enough of a background that you can kind of pick up other parts of the tidyverse by yourself. So now we are in the section called intermediate topics. So we already had the midterm assigned. So today is going to be, like I said, is going to be a little bit of a lighter session. So we are going to be talking about lists and all of the things you can do with RMarkdown, and we will end the class by working on the midterm. So if you do want to present this week, I'm totally fine with that. But I did give that's my second thing that I want to announce is that we're going to push forward all of the talks by 1 week. So the last week that everyone has signed up is week 8. So this should be fine. We'll just move so you will be week 6 talks will be part of week 7. Was there somebody who was, I can't remember who it was. I think it was maybe Lisa who was mentioning that she didn't mind going today, but I'll give you the option if you want to.
It wasn't me. I went last week or the week before.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Lisa. But yeah, so you will have the option to do that. So if you want to give it this week, but like again, my availability this last week was just really crappy because I was doing admissions and interviewing PhD candidates and things like that. So things that take away from fun things like teaching this course. So anyhow, like we'll kind of work on lists in RMarkdown and the midterm today. The next class that kind of sets you up for, this is kind of one of the most important kind of intermediate topics, which is the idea of batch processing. And so like, for example, if you had a whole folder of Excel files, how would you, and they all had the same format, how would you basically process them all and not have to repeat code over and over again? And that's part of why we talked about functions last week. The week after that, we'll be talking about stats and formulas in Broom. So this will be probably a review for most of you, but at least it will very carefully kind of go through the formula interface and talk about things that are confusing about it. And has anyone here used the Broom package? Just put your answer in chat. Yeah, so Broom is a package. It makes working with the output of statistical models a lot easier. Now that I use it, I don't even know how I got by without it. But we'll talk about that on the 24th. So on March 3rd, that'll be an introduction to tidy models and like the basics of machine learning. And hopefully we'll cover a little bit about simulation, like bootstrapping, because these are all things that you probably will have to do as a statistician in your career at one point or another. So the final project will be assigned on week 9. So March 10th is technically our last class. So I'm going to leave that open in terms of what people want to do. So, I mean, we can do something like working on working on Leaflet, which is kind of the interactive map interface. We can work with tidy text, or I can help you set up your own websites. So those are going to be like the three choices. I'll send out a survey, and I'll just kind of see what everybody wants to do that day. March 17th, you know, if people want more class, I'm happy to do it, but just know that's when your final project is due. But I don't want to, I know you all are overwhelmed, so I want to basically give you finals week back. Any questions about the schedule? So we're still in good shape, and you know, we'll see how far we get. But you know, if people are interested in making your own websites, I'm going to show you kind of the basis of that today when we talk about Markdown. But you know, and I'm all for kind of empowering people to kind of share their analyses. So that's, you know, part of the motivation why I'm showing you how to kind of set up your own website. Okay, so I am just going to go over, we're going to go over muddiest points from last class. So I'm just going to go into class 5, part 5. So I just want to get some feedback from people. So one of the #1 muddiest points was joining data sets. A lot of people said this. So do you want more exercises, or do you want more kind of examples of this, or did the homework help? Okay. So yeah, okay. So I'm hearing that people don't want more about this. So what I will do is I will fine tune those lessons. I will add more examples in there for next year. But we won't go further into joins. So there were some other things. Muddiest points that people had: which figures require short or long or wide data frames. So I will try to put together a couple more examples of that. Still trying to figure out when to turn stuff into a factor. So in last week's reading, I have added a nice tutorial that goes through more about factors. So I thought it was a really nice kind of discussion of factors. So hopefully that will help. I will also kind of, so that this part, more practice with pivot longer. So I will definitely have an extra RMarkdown about that. So this is a comment of the week. I didn't expect to have a comment of the week as part of this, but I'm not going to say who said this, but they said, I got to reprimand my husband for poor spreadsheet hygiene this week, and I thought you'd appreciate that. And I really did appreciate that. Thank you. That made my week. So let's go into part 6 of the class. Oh, I do want to, so functions have also been updated. So these are all everybody's functions so far. They're just in order. I may sort them just by kind of alphabetically, but we'll see. So now we're just going to look, and just to drive the point home about the reading for part 5. So there is a nice, this is a nice tutorial. It's called Control Your Factors Using 4 Cats. So hopefully that will help, you know, the person who is having some issues with kind of really understanding when to use factors. And I will say factors are just, no one has, I've looked at a bunch of different approaches for how to teach them. No one really has a good kind of concept map for teaching factors. So it's been a little difficult to kind of find the best way to kind of present that. So just talking about this week. So we're going to be talking a lot more about RMarkdown today. So these are some nice resources. These are also in the slides. So just kind of mentioning that these are some kind of optional reading, but like as you kind of dive in further and further deep into RMarkdown, you'll find these references useful. Okay, so now I'm going into the part 6 class. So I am going to let you vote. So we're going to be talking about lists, and we're going to be talking about RMarkdown. Which do you want me to start with? No preference, lists. One for RMarkdown. Okay, so I guess everyone's kind of more like, dessert last, and I appreciate that. So we will go into lists. So what I want you to do is I want you to open your RStudio Cloud and go into part 6. So I'm now in part 6, and I am just in the part6.rmd file. So let's kind of talk about what the learning objectives are for today. So we're going to be learning about lists, and they're a very general purpose data structure in R. We'll learn and utilize some list properties of lists. We'll access list elements using the $sign and the double brackets operator. So we'll talk about the difference of between that. We'll understand the difference between homogeneous and heterogeneous lists. So homogeneous lists are lists that everything is kind of the same data type, whereas heterogeneous lists are everything. You'll see that the flexibility of lists allows you to kind of put anything in what's called a slot. We'll use the per function called pluck to access list elements. Finally, this was a bit mind-blowing when I encountered it. I don't know if it's going to be of interest to everyone, but we'll talk about how data frames are list-like, and we'll look a little bit about how to apply a function to a list. So we've mostly applied functions to like one data frame, but we're going to start thinking about it when we have a list of data frames, you'll see that we can do some really powerful things. So what are lists? So they're a very general purpose data structure in R. They're very flexible in that they have slots, and a slot can contain anything. It can contain a vector, it could contain a data frame, or even this, and this was when I first encountered this, I was like, what? Like they can either contain another list in a slot. And like I mentioned before, lists themselves can be heterogeneous. So each slot can contain a different data type. So we're going to start with, it's a fairly homogeneous list. At least the data types are going to be all the same. So I'm going to go through this code here. So to instantiate a list, you use the list function. And what we're doing is, this is much like what's called a named vector. So you can name the slots. So the first slot we're going to be calling cat names, and we're going to be putting this character vector in there. The second one is going to be hedgehog names, and it's just going to be a single character value. And then the last one is going to be dog names. So to create elements of the list, you can put the name of your slot, and then what you want to put in there. And each slot is separated by commas. So you can see cat names, and then comma, hedgehog names equals spiny, comma, and then dog names is equal to rover, comma, spot. So let's just run this code block. And you can see when we call my list that there are these different, it has what are called 3 different slots, and each of these slots contains character vectors. So I was just discussing this on Twitter with a bunch of other instructors, and we've all agreed that lists are very confusing because there's a lot of different notation that's associated with them. So we're going to go through these kind of slowly. Was there a question or something? Okay. So let's talk about some properties of lists. And I tried to make this at least somewhat amusing, but you know, this is a very dry subject. And like I have to use kind of canned examples. But as you'll see next week, we'll get into like processing a list that has data frames in it, and hopefully it'll get much more interesting. So if we instantiate our list with this list function, one thing we'll find out is that lists have a length. So anyone have a guess what the length of our list is? Yeah, 3, because we have these 3 slot names. So if we run length my list on here, so you'll see that our list has length 3. So another thing you can do, another property of lists, is if you have provided these names, you can access the names with the names function. And so you can see that we've got each element of the list, or each slot of the list, has a name: cat names, hedgehog names, dog names. So what happens if you didn't name things? So I'll show you an example of that. Just call it my list 2, and then say we just list. So say we just kind of added and this is where the notation gets a little hard to read. I will admit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add kind of returns so it's a little more clear what's going on. And we'll try names my list 2. So the first one, so we called names on my list, which is named. So you can see that one has a name. But if you don't name the slots, then you will get a null. So that just means that you haven't set the names of any of the slots. And I apologize for like all of this repetition, but this was actually originally part of what's called a Learn R tutorial. And you have to basically execute, like each of these code windows has to be independent of each other. So that's why you see that I'm basically repeating the assignment into my list every time. So one way to access an element in a list is by using what's called the $ operator. And we've been avoiding this all this time. I really kind of admire the tidyverse because you don't have to use this, but this is like one way you can access a slot in the list. So you can use $, and then cat, like for example, cat names, note that this is not in quotes. So if you do my list $cat names, what you will get is you will get the vector that we stored in cat names. So okay, so like we're going to so you can also access an element of the list by using this double brackets accessor. So this is where things get confusing, because you can basically pass in different arguments into this double bracket. So here we're saying we want the first element of the list, and since we defined the first element as cat names, that's going to return cat names. So if I wanted to return dog names, what would I put instead of 1 there? Yeah, exactly, 3. So lists have an order to them. So that's what we're learning here. So here's also something that this is also a way you can access using the double brackets notation, is that you can put in a character in here. And I don't like how this is different. So this, the way you access this, you can see that there's no quotes. Here, there are quotes. So this is something that trips me up all the time. But this becomes really useful because you can actually put in a variable. So if I said name slot is equal to hedgehog names, I can actually use that as in this accessor. So as you start kind of doing more programming, you'll find that that's actually this format is useful. But I will say there's no shame, and don't think that any of these ways of accessing elements in a list are any better than another. That's the main reason why we have this kind of being able to pass a character into this double bracket system. Any questions? I know this is very, very dry and dull. So what about single bracket? We will get there. So in fact, we are getting there right now. So, and this is the other thing about lists I really don't like, is that you, as Sarah has mentioned, there are 2 kinds of ways to access elements in a list. There is the double bracket accessor, and there is the single bracket accessor. The main difference is, and this is subtle, and it took me a long time to really understand what the difference is. So this returns what we put into the list, the double brackets. So that is going to return our name, our vector of our character vector. What I really don't like about the single bracket accessor is that it will actually return a list of length 1 that contains your character vector. So here we're going to use the single bracket accessor. And you can see that there's actually a slot here called hedgehog names. So what we have done is we have basically subsetted the list to just hedgehog names. And if you type in class my list to see what kind of object it is, you'll see that it's a list. And that if we do length on this as well, you'll see that it has length 1. So, okay, so single returns a variable or name of vector and its data, and double is data. Yeah, so Sarah, it's a really subtle thing. So it's returning what, it's like the difference between returning what's in the slot and by itself, or returning the slot and what's in it, if that makes sense. And again, I really don't like the single bracket accessor because, and this is why I avoided teaching this for so, like we're only getting to it now because it is super confusing. I will say in most cases, you want to use the double brackets. Yeah. Yeah, so I will say that, you know, if this is confusing, just focus on using the double brackets. Don't worry about the single brackets. And this, again, like I said, like it took me a long time to really understand what the difference is, but most of the time you want to use the double brackets. Any other questions or thoughts? Is everyone confused or? Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to find the length of the cat names element in my list and paste your code into chat when you're done. And what I mean by cat names element, I mean the length of the vector that's in cat names. Yeah, these all work. So you can see that, you know, that's, what is another way to do this? So length my list. What could I put in here instead? Yeah, exactly. So I could put length my list 1. So all 3 of those are valid ways to get that cat names element and do something with it. So we're going to be talking a lot more about per next week, but I just want to show you that there is, within the tidyverse, they have thought of everything. So they have this function called pluck from the per function. And if you just needed to get, you know, 1 slot out of a list, you can do it with pluck. And this can be very handy in, like, again, when you're building a pipeline. So you can see that it just basically returned the character vector that was in cat names. So what I want you to do for this one, I want you to try the following code and understand what it returned. So specifically, I want you to understand, did it return a data frame or a vector? Sorry, so Natalie's question is, what is a pluck in the brackets with R at the beginning of this chunk? Oh, okay, so we will be talking about this. These are ways to name your code chunks, but I'll talk about this when we get to RMarkdown. So why don't you try running the code and check what, and you can also do this. You can check the class. So you can pipe it just into class to understand what's going on. So is it returning a data frame or is it returning a vector? And again, we're running this on a data frame. Yes, exactly. It's returning the vector. So this should give you a clue of what a data frame is. So we'll get to this in a second. But ultimately, a data frame is a very specialized list. But And when I found that out, my mind was kind of blown, but it may be of less interest to you. So you can see that it's returning a factor vector here. Okay, so we can once we've kind of defined a list, we can add things to the list. So we can say, we can use this $ operator to do it. So look, we've got our slots, we've got cat names, hedgehog names, and dog names. So using the $accessor, accessor, we can call a brand new slot name. So we're going to call it raccoon names. And then we're going to put in Rocky. And then you'll see that we just basically added it to the end of our list. So in case you see that, that's what's going on. So the way to read this is we are creating a new slot, raccoon names, and we are putting in this character vector that just has Rocky in them. I can also overwrite things in a list. So if I said cat names, and I just said just put in meow meow, it's not going to change it, or it's not going to add that to the end of it. It's going to completely overwrite it. So you can see now we have cat names, and there's just only one value in meow meow, or that says meow meow. So any questions about this? Like, I found this really confusing when I first encountered it. Oh, that's great, Brady. So yeah, I mean, again, this seems, you're like, what is the point of this? But again, just kind of stick with me. Next week, they will become much more useful. Like, I tried jumping straight into per, and it wasn't very successful. So I really just want to kind of give you the skills for kind of reading the code. Okay. Now I am on the section near line 176 called homogeneous versus heterogeneous lists. So oftentimes, I would say the number one use case when we're doing what's called batch processing is that we're going to assume that the lists that are going into them are homogeneous. And that is the data type for each list, for each slot or list element is the same for all of the slots. In our case, usually what's going to happen is that the data type that we're putting in our list is going to be a data frame. So we'll have a list of 3 or 4 data frames, and we want to do something to each of them and perhaps, put them together at the end. So I'm just going to show you, and this is like if you have done work with the LM function, this is kind of how you work with the output. So I'm going to run the LM function. So this is linear modeling. So I'm going to make a linear model of seeing whether bill length is going to predict body mass. And we're going to use the penguins data. And one way to kind of get stuff out of it is to call summary. So if I just run this code right here, you'll actually see that so I'm just taking summary of our linear model, and then I'm putting it in the sum_output object. So I called names on sum output. You'll see that there are these different slots. So if you type in class of sum output, you'll see, well, okay, underneath it's a list. Sorry, I should have checked that before I showed it to you. But you access elements in sum output by using the $ operator. So just to kind of, and we'll just kind of finish the list section, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll come back. So this is just kind of building on what we've learned before. We're going to basically make a function, and this function is called run penguin model. So now that I think of it, this is kind of this might be a little too much code at once, but well, let's go through it. So our function has one argument, species. And I'm not sure if I showed you last time, but if you want to have a default value for an argument, you can set it in the parentheses here. So here I'm just going, if I just ran run penguin model, it's just going to default to species is equal to Torgerson. Is it I think that should be island. I apologize. So that I think so that is, this should be, sorry, island, just to make things confusing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a subset of penguins that's just going to be that species. But oh, okay, here's a way to fix it. Let's just say, make this gen2 and species. So we're going to take that subset. We're going to run that same linear model. But say we only want the coefficients of that model, and we only want the, like, what the formula was for that model. So we can make a new list, and I'm going to name it. So coefficients are going to be from output coefficients, or output $ coefficients, and the call or the formula is going to be an output $ call. So that goes into outlist, and then we're going to return it. And I think this should, let's try gen2 here. And so you see that output model only has 2 slots in it, and it has the coefficients here, and it has what's called the call. So this is basically, this is like how we instantiated the model. Yeah, call is basically, call is just everything that is how you, is basically this. So it's how you kind of instantiated the linear model. Does that make sense? So if you look at call, so you can see its formula is equal to, and it's equivalent to this. So it's body mass, tilde, length, millimeters, and then it has the data argument. So is it always the linear model? How does it generalize? So this is a common, it's common, but not always the same. And this is part of why, like, doing the modeling in R can be difficult, is that someone else, for example, wrote the LM function versus, you know, if you needed to use a more specialized function, it's not always going to be the same. For most of the LM functions and GLM, this is the same, but it's not always guaranteed to be the same across all of the different modeling packages. And we'll see in a couple weeks that this is what the problem that PER solves, because it tries to standardize all of the output of the models. So if you needed a p-value for something, it's always going to be accessed with the same, in the same place. So Broom, that was David Robinson and David Robinson's baby, and it has basically kind of taken the stats world by storm. I don't know how I could live without Broom, because it was you always had to read the documentation to even get like a p-value out of like the LM function. So that's kind of what's going on. So I just want you to return the call slot from output model and just paste your link or paste your code into chat. Yep, looks good, Brady. Yep, looks good, Martin. Yeah, looks good, Lindsay. So this is the last thing we're going to be doing before we take a break. So we're going to be talking about data frames, how data frames are basically lists underneath. So any questions so far? I mean, these are good questions about the call. Like, you know, again, these are things that I don't think about, but like, I'm glad you're asking the question, like, you know, and I'm not glad it was confusing, but I'm glad you asked the question to clarify it. Yeah, looks good, everyone. Okay. So one thing that you might know is that you can access columns in a data frame using the $sign. So we're going to load this, not my favorite data set, empty cars, but we're going to load it up. So if I just take the length of empty cars, you'll see that it has a length of 11. That corresponds to the number of variables in our in empty cars. So if you needed to access one column, you could use empty cars $MPG. And again, remember that there's no quotes on this one. So that just gives us the vector that is the MPG column. You can also do this. And this is where I might regret showing you this because it's not, you might get the comma notation. Sorry, was there a question?
I'm in class.
Oh, okay. So if I do empty cars, double brackets 1, you'll see it returns the same thing. So this is not to be confused, and this is why I don't like showing this notation. I just want to show you that underneath data frames are lists. These will return the equivalent things. So again, we don't really, we try to avoid using this, using the comma notation if possible, but sometimes you just need to use it. But that's why I don't really like showing this one, but it exists, so you might as well know about it. You can also use you can also pass in a character in here, so empty cars, and then the MPG as a character, and it will return the same thing. Yeah, so how do we find their index numbers in a list? So one way to do it, if you just call on names, and you just basically count from the left. This is a fast way to do it. Eric, do you know of a good programmatic way to do it? There's a lot of really ugly base R ways to do it, but this is kind of the quick and dirty way that I know how to do it.
I mean, programmatic, you could do named. So say you wanted the index of, let me think. I don't know about the number.
I can do it with which, but it's not.
Yeah. Well, like say you wanted, well, actually, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I was thinking about which.
But so this is a quick and dirty way. Oftentimes, like though you want to try to avoid using kind of index numbers if you can, because they're in what's called in programming magic numbers. So say you actually added another column to empty cars, like at the beginning, then your code that uses the numbers is actually going to break. So you want to try to avoid using magic numbers. In general, you want to try to use, if there are names, you want to try to access things using the names. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So this is the last section. Actually, let's take a 5-minute break right now, and we can pick up so come back at 4:06. And if there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer them in chat. I will be back in just a second. So if you can pause recording, Eric. Great, thank you. So after I told Sarah, I just realized my example here, like about finding indices and that you should try to avoid using numeric indices. I look at my function and I actually do use numeric indices, but it does make sense for this example. I do tell you. So, okay, so we're going to we're going to define a function called getFirstElement. And it's going to take a list. And what is it going to return from that list? The hint is in the name. Yeah, exactly, Brady. So yes, the first element of the list, because you can see the long way to do this would be like, so we might say out element is equal to input list 1, and then we would return out element. I inadvertently used a shorthand here, so that's what's going on here. So we can apply this function to each element of a list. And so what we're going to be doing, by doing this, we can do, this is usually easiest if the list is homogeneous. And remember, homogeneous lists are lists have the same data type in each slot. So the function we're going to use is called map. And this is just a quick introduction to map. We will go into map in much further depth next week. And this comes from the per package. So it usually takes 2 inputs. The first argument is always a list that we want to process. And the second one is the function that we want to process them with. So we're going to apply, what we're going to do is so each element of our list, and I just realized that this is kind of confusing. So we'll talk through this some more. So we're going to basically run map on my_list. And what we are doing is we're going to run the getFirstElement function on each element in the list. So what is going to be the length of new list? Yeah, so 4 because we added the raccoon names. Right, exactly. So if we do this, let's run the code. Oh, I have to actually run that code. Come on. Okay. Sorry, I have to cut and paste things. I will fix this in a second. So you can see it returned the first element of each of the slots. So like I said, next time, so just kind of stick with this. I know this is confusing when you first kind of encounter it, but the main thought is that you can write a function that can process each of the elements of a list, or what's in the slots of each the slots when each slot of the list. So this is much like the for loops, but I like this because it's a lot simpler. You don't have to do all of that assignment. It generates a list. Like when you run map, it will always return a list that has the same length that you put into it. So to me, it's very nice because you don't have to manage, like, what goes into where. And we saw that one of the issues with the for loops, for example, when we were making vectors, we had to add values to the end of the vectors. So this actually gets rid of a lot of those headaches that we had with for loops. So yeah, so Brady, that's a good question. So a lot of the times when you're writing a function, you are assuming that your inputs or your arguments are going to be the same. You could potentially write a function that deals with heterogeneous elements by checking the data type of each element. Like, so you could check if the first one is a data frame, then do this thing. If it's a vector, it's a character vector, then do this thing. But in practice, we try to use map on homogeneous lists. And we'll talk more about that next time. Good question. So are there any questions? How are people feeling about this? Annoyed? Confused? Borderline understanding. Sometimes that's all we can go for, Sarah. Yeah. So like, hopefully it'll become much more concrete, but I have to show you how to access all, like, and manipulate lists before we can really get into per. So that's why I'm really trying to really kind of talk about the basics here. And like I said, it's really kind of a confusing topic, but like hopefully it'll become more clear by next week. Okay, so now we're going to get into RMarkdown. So this was a request to go over kind of all like the different RMarkdown options and what you can do with it. So that's why this is kind of I'm not going to say it's the fluffy part, but this is kind of the more fun part of today's lesson or lecture. So this is I'm just under classes, under part 6, and I'm just opening the slides here. So we have been kind of skirting around what RMarkdown is. Like, I haven't really shown you. Some of you have actually know some of the options you can set, but I want to kind of formally introduce RMarkdown and like what it's capable of and what it's actually doing. So this is just called What You Can Do with RMarkdown. Not a very creative name, but practical. So this is just a warning. So RMarkdown is a very deep but rewarding rabbit hole. But at least what I show you today is going to be very useful. So what is RMarkdown? So to paraphrase Tolkien, so it's one format to rule them all. So the cool thing about RMarkdown is that when you make an RMarkdown file, you can output it into a ton of different formats. So I just realized this bullet point is not that helpful, but it comes from what's called Markdown. And Markdown, do people know what HTML is? Or have heard of it? Yeah, so I think most of you know that HTML is basically what the language that web pages are written in. But HTML, if you've ever written it by hand, is incredibly hard to get right because there's just lots of mistakes you can make. And so Markdown was developed as an alternative to HTML. So it's very, as you've seen, it's very human readable, but it can be translated very easily into HTML. So that was kind of the original use for Markdown. But as we've seen, like RMarkdown lets you mix code and text. And this is it actually has a name. I think Donald Knuth was the originator of this term, but it's called Literate Programming. And the thought with literate programming is that you are putting text and comments with your code so you can talk people through it. And we've seen that, like, in like your assignments, like you can basically kind of talk me through like your code and what you're doing with it. And it's a very kind of practical thing to do. And like I said, it can be made into very many different formats. So let's talk about the parts of an RMarkdown document. So the very first part of an RMarkdown document, although this is optional, you don't need to have it, is what's called the metadata. It's also known as front matter, and I will be referring to it as front matter like in the rest of this talk. So it lets you set like the formatting options, lets you set the document type. You can set things like the default figure height and figure width if you don't like the defaults here. So that's kind of what the metadata is for. You can also add information like who authored the article, what is their website, these kinds of things. So we've encountered text. Text is an important thing for our Markdown. And I just haven't had that much time to go over Markdown formatting, but this is kind of a link that's built into the website that introduces you kind of to some of the basics. So like, for example, if you want to do bold text, you can see that you use two asterisks. The most important thing to note really is the headings, because the headings are very important, much like in making a Word document that kind of determines the structure of your table of contents. So like, for example, like the top level of the heading might be a chapter, and then the second level heading might be a section in that chapter, and so on. So this is just a nice little reference. So if you want to start learning more Markdown, all of these things will work in RMarkdown as well. So the other side of RMarkdown is that if you are outputting an HTML document of some kind, you can actually put in HTML tags as well. Has anyone embedded, basically shared Twitter code, and you've seen like the embed option? I'll just show an example just a second. So like, for example, if I wanted to share this tweet, I can click Embed Tweet. And you can see that, come on. So what I can copy this code, and this code is actually HTML, and I can cut and paste it into a web page, and it will display the bottom, it will display the tweet. So A lot of things like this you can directly put into an RMarkdown file, and it will render. So let's go back. And then finally code chunks, and code chunks, what happens is that code gets executed and output gets generated. And the main thing that you need to note is that code chunks are executed in the order that they are written in the text. Any questions so far? Yes. Yeah. So Bradley, you can just put HTML code directly into the RMD and it will read it properly. So there's a caveat. It has the output type has to be HTML of some type. It can't be PDF, for example, because and we'll talk more about this in a second. But yeah, and I use this trick all the time. Sometimes I need to fine tune the size of an image. And so you can actually put in IMG or image tag into your HTML, and like you can set the width of that figure or something like that. So very handy for inserting GIFs and things like that. I don't do it too often, but my friend Allison, so she's the master of that. I'm still but an apprentice in terms of GIFing compared to Allison. So let's talk about how it actually works. So when you actually click knit document, what is actually known as the knitting process is actually generating the outputs from the code blocks. So those might be graphs. Those might be graphs, or those might be tables. There's lots of different kind of outputs. So that's kind of the first part of the process. And then so you've got the text, and then you got the outputs. So those are passed down into what's called a rendering engine that actually makes the document. So you don't need to know too much about this, but this is how RMarkdown basically makes all of the different kinds of files. So the one that it really runs on is called pandoc. So it can generate so many different formats from your Markdown. So it can generate HTML, can generate Word documents. If you wanted to make like an ebook, like in the EPUB format, you could do it. There's Wikimedia format. It basically is kind of this universal translator that takes Markdown and makes it into something else. You can take, like for example, you can take a Word document and you can translate it back into Markdown. It's less successful at that. It's usually meant to go from Markdown or RMarkdown into something else. But I just wanted to point out that there are these different rendering engines underneath it. And these presentations are actually powered by this engine that's called reveal.js. And I use a specific kind of format called Jerrigan. We won't talk about that today because it actually takes kind of some time to learn it. But it also is able to output LaTeX. And so from LaTeX, you can generate PDFs and things like that. So if you have a collaborator who insists on working directly in LaTeX, it can save the LaTeX code as well. So it doesn't have to, you don't end at the PDF, you can actually end at the LaTeX level. And so like, your collaborators who are obviously masochists, can basically manipulate that LaTeX code. So any questions about this? This is kind of more information than you need, but I just want to basically show how knitting works, how you can take one document and you can basically make all sorts of different documents from it, or document types from it. Okay, so I'm going to go over some of the front matter options, and I'm just going to, at the end, I'll have some tips on like how you can write good front matter, because this is this is a format that I often find that so Brady is asking, so do you put the LaTeX code directly into the RMD? No, sorry, that didn't, I think I didn't explain. You can put like equation code directly into RMD files, I believe. And you have to kind of precede them with 2 question marks. The code has to be wedged between 2 question marks. But in general, like that's mostly just for kind of equation code. But I don't really think you can mix LaTeX code and RMarkdown code as freely as that. Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's just $. Oh, thanks. Yeah, I don't. You can tell I don't really use LaTeX all that often. So, okay, so let's talk about the front matter and all of the different options. So this is like part of what makes RMarkdown so powerful, but it also makes it so difficult to understand. So front matter in general, so again, this is kind of all of the options that we want to set for our document. It's in a format called YAML. And I really like, I hate this kind of geeky kind of joke names because it is what's called a recursive name. YAML is literally short for YAML ain't markup language. And I'm sure someone who thought of that thought they were being really clever, but I think it's just confusing. But it's a way of specifying options. And it always has this format in an RMarkdown file. So it always starts with the 3 dashes. You will put, an option or setting, and there will be a colon after that. Importantly, there's always going to be a space after the colon, and then it's going to be whatever value you want to set for the settings. And then finally, you'll end with 3 dashes. Yeah. So thanks for adding that, Bradley. Again, like, I'm not super conversant in LaTeX, so I tend to work mostly in HTML. So thanks for adding that information. Okay, so let's look at a specific front matter example. So this is something that this is an example that you might actually use. So we will go through all of these different settings and options. So again, remember, it has to start with 3 dashes and end with 3 dashes. So we'll go through each of these separately. So these are ones that you've already encountered before. So title and author. So technically, you don't have to put quotes in here. You don't have to put your option in quotes. I tend to do it just out of habit because to me it just makes sense to me. I don't like just putting kind of plain just like introduction to Markdown without quotes, but that's just me. So you can see that we're basically providing a title and an author argument. So this one's a tricky one. So you can use a regular format, and when you make a new Markdown file, you'll see that it just basically will generate. It will just fill in this date setting with like the current date. This here is what is called an inline code chunk, and it is specified. You specify it with the backticks. And it has to start with the R because that's a signal that says, oh, this is an R, this is R code, so I want you to execute it. So that's going to execute the sys.date function, and that's going to automatically fill that with the current date. So if you have seen that before and you've wondered why the hell we do that, that's why. And it's extremely handy because it kind of gives you an audit trail, like, okay, this document was knitted on this day. So, in case you need to go back and make changes, you know what you need to kind of re-update. So any questions about that that date field or setting. Sorry, I'll try to use setting. Okay. So this is one that we've kind of encountered. But this is kind of in a format that you might not have seen before. So this is what's called a nested setting. So the output can be lots of different options. We're going to be concentrating on HTML documents and distill articles and slidey presentations. I just wanted to show you kind of all of the things you can do. But you can see that like under output, there are 2 spaces, and then we put HTML document. So the way to read that is we want to output an HTML document, but there are further options that we want to set within HTML document. So for example, we can set a theme, we can set a table of contents, we can set whether we want the document to number the sections. So the rule is always use 2 spaces. So this is 2 spaces here. And then for the next level, it's 4 spaces. So every level is 2 spaces. So I'm telling you right now to use spaces. This is the thing that it took me a long time to learn about this. And it was very painful when I was first writing these, was that I didn't know that you couldn't use tabs here. YAML is very picky. It does not allow tabs in anywhere in the document. And that's why I kind of don't like it. But this is like, once you kind of get used to it, it's okay. Any questions about this so far? Okay. So like I said, we're going to look at 3 of the output types. HTML document. So we played with this, but I want to show you some of the options. This one is kind of new and upcoming, the distill article, but I really like it because it looks really professional right out of the box, and you can customize it, but it will always look good. So I'm not that great at web design, so I kind of like having something that has really good bones that looks really professional. And finally, you can do slides as slidey presentations. So all 3 of these output types are actually HTML files. And I will show you at the end how you can actually put this up on the web and share it with other people. Yes, so Bradley's question is, so you mean tabs as opposed to just putting spaces? Yeah, exactly. So like hitting the tab key instead of putting in spaces. Although some people set up their tab key to just be spaces, and that's fine. But in general, it does not like the tab character. There are a lot of different other output formats. So like that's why I do like RMarkdown. It's just kind of, Brady's asking, is distill a package that has to be downloaded first? Yes. So the clue to that is the double colons. So these 2 are built into RMarkdown, but distill is not. So there's lots of different kind of output types. So there's jargon, which is a presentation like format like this. There's shiny web apps. Oops. Sorry. I do publish a lot of my tutorials in something called Learn Our Tutorials. But like I said, you can build websites, you can write books in it. It's an extremely kind of powerful format that has lots of different options. So we're first going to look at some of the options in HTML document. A lot of these apply to distill as well, and we'll get into that when we actually look at the notebooks. So there's lots of other options for formatting it. So we'll look at a few, like table of contents, themes, section numbering, figure formatting, and some of these I will show in the notebook. So you can embed certain kinds of interactive visualizations, such as plotly plots, And you can also put data frames or tables in specific formats. So let's talk about themes first. So again, all of these are options under HTML document. So nicely enough, they have there's a number of built-in themes, and I think some of you know about these. And if you have a favorite theme, please put it in chat. These are the ones I kind of know and I use. Flatly, and we'll look at an example of that, Cosmo, Lumen, and Paper. And if you want to know more about all of the different themes, so Downcute, that's a I'll have to check that one out. Sandstone, okay, cool. Pretty Doc. Yeah, so we'll we'll look at a couple of these. But yeah, so there are a lot of these are kind of immediate ways to kind of style your document so it doesn't look like the same thing. So this is our Markdown theme gallery. These are the ones that are built into our Markdown or are in different packages. Some of these look very generic. So here's Cosmo. Here's Flatly, etc. So you can take a look at these, and it should tell you what's built in and what's not. So some of these I'm not a big fan of, I won't say, because I don't like to criticize design. But there are, and we'll talk about some of the other packages that have different themes built into them. So these are some of the ones, and people have mentioned these packages. So glad I wasn't the only one who likes these. So there is a Pretty Doc package. These are slightly different. I don't have time to get into that, but I can show you next time. So this is Bob Rudis's package. So you read it as Harbor Themes. So it's his moniker on Twitter is Harbor Master, so that's why that's HARBR. RMD formats, someone already mentioned. If you want to be like Edward Tufte, there is a package to do that. So there's a link to like talking about Tufte handouts. Is it Tufte or Tufty? I never know. I'll say Tufty. And if you want to make your own, there is this nice talk. It's called Branding and Packaging Reports with RMarkdown. And this is actually important for companies. They may have a company theme. So like all of their reports look consistent and things like that. So these are two that I find that are really useful. TOC true. So this adds a table of contents to the front of your file, much like if you added a table of contents with a Word document. The nice thing, and we'll explore this in a second, so you can do this float option. So the table of contents will basically sit on the side, and like it'll always be accessible like as you scroll down. And I'll show an example of that. Another useful one is number sections. So this will auto number each section. And there are actually ways to kind of include this reference into your document. So if you said in chapter 1, and then you added a chapter before that, it will change it to chapter 2. I don't have time to kind of go into that, but I'll point you to Nick Tierney's RMarkdown for Scientists, which has a lot more information about that. Okay, so let's actually look at the notebook. So I'm going to open up my RStudio Cloud. And again, I don't like to talk like too much. So let's open up part 6 again. Take your sweet time. Okay, so I'm going to clear everything out. We're going to close up part 6. So what I'm opening up is the RMarkdown _ example 1 in the main folder. So this is just kind of your opportunity to kind of play with the different options. I added another one called code folding. But this is really just to show you, like, give you kind of the opportunity to kind of experiment with different options here. And if you want to comment out things in the front matter, you use a hashtag, much like was with the code windows. So this basically has just disabled table of contents and making the table of contents fold. So I'm going to apply the theme of flatly to our HTML document. So let's just knit it and see what happens. And sometimes you might have to hit try again. And just, okay, and so you can see now, like, we applied that theme. So the other thing we applied was we had this df print option, and I'll talk about that in a second. But you can see that now the data frame is kind of prettily formatted, and, like, you know, it's in this kind of paged format. So what I want you to do is, let's see, how do we close this down? Okay. I want you to play with, like, the different options. So try enabling TOC is true and TOC float is equal to true. So you can see now that we have this table of contents on the left side, and as we kind of scroll it, it stays in the same position. So this is really handy. So, like, you can see that we've created a table of contents, and that has to do with, like, our headings. So what I want you to do is I want you to try playing around with different themes, and you know, trying like the different formats for for DF print. So there's paged and cable. And when you kind of come up with something that you like, I want you to paste your front matter into chat. So let's take a few minutes just kind of playing around. Anyone have any formats they want to share or kind of styles? So you can here I set the theme to be cerulean. And then here, like I made the data frames as a page data frame. And then I made table of contents to be true, but I didn't make the table of contents floating. Yeah, so that's what this df print option is. This is the default, it's called the default data frame printing option. So that's that paged version. So if I change this to cable with a K and I renet, it'll look different. So you can see this is the cable format. And unfortunately, it shows every row of the data frame, which is probably not what you want. But you can basically, you could slice the first 5 rows or something like that. Okay, so Brady has, so let's see. So she's using cable, and then she's using table of contents true, table of contents float is true. Code folding is equal to show. Okay, and we haven't talked about that, but theme flatly. So this is a really powerful way of kind of styling your reports. And like, never underestimate like kind of spending time on this and making something kind of look appealing to someone. If something is in just like a kind of foreign format, you like anything you can do to make a format friendly is very helpful. Okay, so Natalie has chose paged data frames, floating table of contents, and then code folding show. So Jessica, I think it works. I'm not sure. So that's the one problem is that the rendering engine for PrettyDoc is a little different, so I can't answer that. You can try it. Okay, so Bradley is doing theme sandstone, code folding hide, df print paged. So that looks good too. So I'm going to show you the those people who haven't tried the code folding section what that is. So I'm going to set code folding is equal to hide. And so you can see that there's not, it just shows the output. But if I wanted to actually see the code, there's this little code button here. And it will basically, by default, it's hidden. Sorry, this is a long table. But like if you wanted to see the code, like it's there. And this is often helpful with my collaborators. I will often choose code folding hide. Okay, it looks like people are coming up with other options. Just a second, let me take a look. Oh, so that's a good thing to know, Brady. So a lot of the RMD formats themes have code folding already. So yeah, okay. So the short answer, Sarah. So can we hide on the other exports outputs? Unfortunately, not with PDF and not with Word, as far as I know. Oh, okay. So that's good to know. No, Jessica, that you can't use code folding, download, or TOC float in PrettyDoc. Can we hide the output table, whatever, in a drop-down table, like hide the code? Kind of. So if you look at this example, I give you an example of what's called a tab set. And you define a tab set is at one level. So you have a heading. You need to put under that heading, you need to put this curly brackets and then dot tab set. And then anything that has a higher heading, so this is 2 hashtags, this has 3 hashtags. So this will be presented as what's called a tab set. So if we knit this, I'm hoping it works. So you can see that you can actually, you could basically have the and this is code folding hide, but you can see that like you can have, you can put kind of multiple things in kind of the same area. So you could actually just show the code and then hide the graph, like show the code first and then show the graph second, or the table second, if that makes sense. But yeah, so code folding is limited to mostly code, but that's one way you can kind of, if you wanted to just kind of emphasize something and then put the table behind it, you could do that. So I hope now that you all feel drunk with power, because you now know a lot of really cool options for kind of presenting your analyses. So the one I didn't show that someone pointed out was code download. And this one is very handy. So code download, is it true? I think. Yeah, so Natalie, to make the tab set work, you need to have that. The two things are you have to have, you start it with this, these curly brackets dot tab set. So this tells RMarkdown what everything follows is going to be a tab set. If you want to kind of end the tab set, you have to be at the same level that you started the tab set. So these are one level down. So this is the 3rd level. So if you wanted to just end the tab set, you could say new heading here, and then everything will stop displaying that. So you can, I think you can have up a lot of tab sets. I think the default is 12 because I think this is Bootstrap based, but I'm not sure. But yeah, so you can see that that's a very handy way of showing things. Sorry, what was the question? Oh yeah, I was going to show code download. I think this is correct. So I'm going to make code folding show here. So this is a tab set. If you go to the very top of the document, you can see that there's now this code, and you can click show all code, hide all code, which is handy, or you can actually have them download your RMarkdown file directly. So this is really nice because you can just put this entire HTML file onto a website, and your collaborators can just directly download the RMarkdown file used to generate your code. So I'm hoping this is beginning to show how powerful RMarkdown is, and why almost all of my analyses are done in RMarkdown. I just I got bit with the RMarkdown bug. Like I said, Allison Hill, who's like, she's become the RMarkdown goddess. She, like, almost everything I've learned from her. She's amazing. So there's that. So let's go back to the presentation. Are there any questions about any of these options? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about code chunks, and let's take a 5-minute break. I don't have that much more to show. Just want to kind of show like, some options with code chunks. So in terms of code chunks, and the number one thing is that you can actually name code chunks by just putting a space and then a name after that. So my friend Nick Tierney, he's the one who wrote the RMarkdown for scientists, which is a really handy reference. He suggests that you always have these 3 named code chunks in your file. So you've seen the setup chunk before. The thing I didn't tell you is that this chunk is always run, even if you are hitting play on a later code chunk. It's always going to be run. So code that always needs to be loaded goes in there. He does library. He puts library in his. He has a different code chunk called library. My own tendency is actually to put the code chunks in setup because then the libraries will load automatically. But this is just kind of, I just wanted to show you that like there is a principled way to kind of use your code chunks. And then what he does is he also has a code chunk called functions, and then he puts all of his functions there. So there's more information at this link down here. Okay, so Bradley is asking, is there a good centralized place to look to learn about these options? Yeah, so there is, the website is called RMarkdown, the definitive guide. I will post that. I didn't actually put that as a link, but I'll just show it just a second. Oh, wait, that's the cookbook. So the definitive guide is different than the cookbook. This has all of the information about the different formats. I'm going to paste this into chat just a second. The key about this, and that's why I don't kind of start with this, is that you have to start from the format. As you can see, there's a bewildering number of different formats. So this is all about HTML document. So this will give you all of the information, like, if you want to do section numbering, this gives you all of the options that kind of exist within that document format. Not everything is here. So Distill, for example, is all of that information is in its own website, unfortunately. But this is all the options for PDF. Word document. So Word document doesn't have that many features. You can use a reference template, but overall the Word document is pretty limited. So that's more information about like where you find information about the options. Okay, let's see. Where were we? So our studio, I'd say, is a very inclusive kind of place. So you can not only run R chunks, but you can also run Python chunks. There's also other languages. So if you are just working with a database, for example, there is a SQL chunk. So SQL is short for structured query language. So that's how you write database queries. So, and all of these play very nicely with each other. I think, you can actually take one, like you can make an object in R and you can import it into the Python. So like, for example, like one use case would be there's a machine learning package called scikit-learn. And you could do all of your processing in Python, and then you could pipe your results into R and do all of your plotting in ggplot. So that's one thing to note. But since we're mostly focusing on R, like we're not going to kind of get into that. So why don't we take a 5-minute break? So come back at 5:04, and we'll kind of finish up on code chunks. And then after that, I think there's a little bit more in the notebooks, and well, then we can kind of wrap up, and then those people who want to work on their projects can. Just resume recording, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay, so let's get back into code chunks. So number one, so you can name code chunks. This is not always that useful, but the format is, just the code chunk. You just put a space after and then you put the name. It becomes handy because like you can actually use this code, this name as a reference. Like for example, if you were using your code chunk generated a figure, you can use that as a handle to refer to that figure. And because some of the RMarkdown formats actually have auto figure numbering, so you can see that like this prevents you from having to, if you added a figure in the middle of your document, you don't have to renumber all of the figures again. It does it automatically. I don't have time to really kind of show that, but again, Nick Tierney's book goes into this into pretty big, pretty in depth. So just want to show you a couple of code chunks that are just really helpful. I use these all the time. So for example, like, you know, this is kind of the same thing as code folding hide, but it completely does not show your code. So if you set echo is equal to false, and note that false has to be in, it's just like regular R code. This has to be all capitalized. You will show, like, for example, you will show the ggplot, the graph that's generated by ggplot, but it won't show your ggplot code. Similarly, this is more useful to people like me who need to actually kind of teach things. So I can show a code block, but not run it. Sorry, this should have comma eval equals false right there. So that's a useful option. This happens to me all the time. Sometimes R is a little too verbose and you just want to tell R to shut up. Just show the graph. We know that there's a warning. So you can set message, a warning is equal to false, and message is equal to false. So this is like, you know, when ggplot2 is giving you that warning, dropped X number of rows, you can get rid of that. You don't have to subject your collaborators to it. These two are also really helpful. So fig.height and fig.width. Because the size of a graph, like if you generated a ggplot, it's dependent actually on these parameters. And I'll show you in a second how you can set this globally. So if you wanted all of your figures to be 8 by 8, the default measurement is in inches. So Nick, again, has your back, and there's much more information in this section here. So we already looked at the table options. So the main ones are paged and cable. And I apologize, this is a lot of information, but like there's no better way to kind of present this. So you can actually set a global chunk option. And this is like when you make a new RMarkdown file, you'll see that this line is included in your setup chunk by default. So you can add your options in here. So like if I wanted to have my figures be 8 by 8, you can set fig.width and fig.height here. Okay, so now like I'm going to go back into, let's go back into the notebook. So I'm going to show you that you can actually build, you now have the ability to kind of build websites. So I'm going to go into the site example folder. So this is actually the same thing as this RMarkdown example, but it's just has a different name. So let's go into the site_example folder. And notice that the file is named index.rmd. So to make this work, you have to name your RMarkdown file, and your RMarkdown file has to be in a folder, and it has to be named index.rmd. And this is because the default the name for a web page is index.html, but we'll get to that in a second. So this is a distill format article, and you can see there are a lot more kind of options. This is kind of, I would say distill as a format is relatively new, but like adding it to RMarkdown is pretty new. But you can see it's very much set up for kind of scientific correspondence and collaboration. So here for my author, you can see I'm providing, so like my name, and then my web page, my affiliation, even my org ID. So one thing I didn't put in my talk about YAML is that if you have multiple, so the way to read this is that everything that happens in after that dash is a single unit. So this is everything that belongs to me. And then everything that belongs to after this dash belongs to Joan Rivers here. And this is, so output, you can see we're using distill : distill article. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit this file. And this is like and you can see that, like, you know, it's, I don't want to use the word handsome, but I do like the way it looks, and it's kind of, the styling is kind of very nice. There's built-in table and figure numbering. I can't really go into that, but you can see that here we have like I put a reference to figure 1, and you can see that it's there. You can do things like footnotes. This is just to, like, if you went to my Shiny workshop, you'll know that this is an interactive figure called Plotly. So you can put these kind of Plotly plots, and you can give people a little more information about data points. This is a package I just want to show you because when you are making a table 1, usually the cohort table, this is an extremely powerful package. It's called GT Summary. I literally just piped the Penguins code into this, and you can see I have demographics about everything and all of the variables. And then you can even have it generate, like, you know, do the statistics. So for example, you know, is the distribution, the alternative hypothesis is that the distribution of penguins across islands or species across islands is different. And you can see that we generated a, I believe this is a chi-squared test. So this is just, that's just an extremely powerful package. But what I want to show you is I want to show you that now you can actually publish this onto the web. So I'm going to go back up into the main folder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to export this to my machine. And again, come on. So I'm just going to export this to my desktop. Oh, let's just do downloads. So that's the thing about RStudio Cloud. It, as you know, if you download more than one file, it downloads it as a zip file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my downloads folder. Sorry, this is, you get to see how messy my my computer is. So I'm going to just extract this into its own folder. Okay, so you can see I basically now have that folder, and inside of it is just that index.html. So I'm going to go to this website. I'll put it into chat. And you can follow along and do this too if you want. This website is called Netlify Drop. And I can literally drag this folder with my index.html, my knitted file. I can upload it. This is going to take a second, and then it will generate a URL. So what I want you to do is I want you to go to this link. And you'll see that I basically have shared my HTML file. So this is kind of the quick and dirty way if you want to share something on the net. So you can basically name your RMarkdown file index.rmd. And then this will work with any of the formats that I've shown you. So it will work with HTML document. It will work with distill. It will work with Slidey. And then you can actually customize this URL here. That's just kind of the way that it's made. And I have more information about this. And if people are interested in putting together websites, I have a more extended tutorial if this is of interest. So I'm just going to change it to RMarkdown test. So you can see now the URL is rmarkdown-test.netlify.app. And then if I click on that, you can see it still points to that web page. So that was a really quick overview of how to get stuff on the web. So Allison Hill, again, so she has a great talk called Sharing Online on Short Notice. So if you're more interested in that, you want to immediately start playing around with this, I encourage you to, I'll send out that link if people are interested. But this is kind of the power of RMarkdown. You can get it on the internet very quickly. Any questions? Or did I lose everyone? Yeah, so I mean, if you notice our website, this is basically what I do is actually a little more complicated, but you can see I have also that .netlify.app. So this is kind of how I basically keep the website updated. And again, I'm all for people getting, starting up their own websites. So we do an example in Biodata Club where you kind of put together your personal website. I'll show you what a distill website looks like. Okay. So this is the Shiny workshop. So this is what a distill website will look like. You can have a home and you can have different pages. So this tells you about the licensing of the workshop. So yeah, very good question, Bradley. Yeah, okay, so I will answer Brady's question first. So yes, you can customize some of the colors and you can customize the fonts. I can show you, I can point you to that link. It's a little complicated when you first get into it. It's called editing the cascading style sheet, the .css file. I don't I can kind of show you that in a second, but let me answer Bradley's question first. So yes, so the this might answer your question. I'm just going to show you how the website works. So this is the actual folder that has all of the website stuff. And so this is a little more complicated. Actually, let me show you the PDXR website. So you can see what's going on is the distill package. These are all RMD files. And what happens is the distill package knits all of these files into distill articles. And then it basically generates the HTML in this folder called site. And if this is too much information right now, you can just let this wash over you. But you can see that basically, all of those RMD files basically get converted into HTML files. And getting into Brady's question, so you can customize it. So let me see if this will come up. So this is me just kind of customizing this is also a distill site, and you can do some customization, as you can see here. I don't have time to really get into CSS files because I want to give people the opportunity to kind of work on their midterm if they want to. Let's see. So let's just kind of wrap up. And so this is information about how you make table and figure references. This is information on how you install LaTeX onto your machine. So Yiwei, who's the RMarkdown master, he made this package called TinyTech. And this is a package that installs a minimal version of LaTeX. But I would always follow Yiwei's rule of thumb. So knit to HTML first, and then if you need to, knit to Word and PDF as needed. So I will maybe I'll pick up at the beginning of class next time with these YAML tips. So that's all I have for today. So again, thanks for sticking through with me. And like I said, if you all want to kind of get up a personal website, maybe I'll make that part of the final project. Are people interested in that? Yes. And don't worry if this is this kind of is a lot of information. We will definitely kind of go through this in depth. So at the very least, I will want you to kind of make a distill article for your final project and get it up on the web. And that's kind of the minimum. If you want to do a personal website, that will be great too. But that I will say, if you just want to do the distill article and get it up. Okay, so that's all I have today. If you need to go or you're just tired, you're free to go, but I'm happy to help out with midterm projects. Eric will only be here for about the next 20 minutes, but he's also available. So yeah, hopefully this was interesting. And, I'm, like I said, I'm all for kind of empowering people to get stuff on the web.
Hey, Ted, I had a question about my midterm.
Sure.
I feel like it'll be easiest if I can share the screen. Is that okay?
Yeah, just a second. Let me stop recording.